I thought it was just a regular day. My car broke down at the worst possible moment, and I had no choice but to take it to the nearest repair shop. But the moment I walked in, I saw him. Trey Lawson. Tall, muscular, and with a stare that made my knees weak. I came in for a simple fix, but what I got was something much more complicated. A secret. A temptation. A desire I couldn't ignore. But could something like this really stay hidden? Before we dive into this intense story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our thrilling stories. Now, let's begin. The moment my car engine sputtered and died in the middle of a busy intersection, I knew my day was ruined. I gripped the steering wheel, muttering a curse under my breath as the cars behind me blared their horns. Great, just what I needed. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Sighing, I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest repair shop. Lawson's Auto Repair. It was only a few blocks away. I called the number, and after 2 rings, a deep, gravelly voice answered. Lawson's. What's the problem? The voice alone sent a strange shiver down my spine. It was smooth but commanding, like the kind of voice that expected to be listened to. Yeah, my car just died in the middle of an intersection. Any chance you can send a tow truck? What's the make and model? I gave him the details, and after a pause, he said, I'll send someone right now. Then the line went dead. No unnecessary small talk. Efficient, direct. 15 minutes later, a tow truck pulled up, and the driver stepped out. And that was when my day really changed. He was huge, tall, broad shoulders, thick arms covered in grease stains. His dark brown skin gleamed under the sun, and when he pulled off his sunglasses, I was met with a pair of deep, piercing eyes. Damn. I swallowed hard, suddenly forgetting how to form words. He glanced at me, then at my car, and smirked. You the guy with the dead engine? I nodded. Yeah, that's me. Trey Lawson, he said, extending a strong, calloused hand. I took it, and the heat of his palm sent something electric through me. Logan Hayes, I said, trying to sound normal. His grip was firm, strong, but not crushing. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary before letting go. Was I imagining things? Trey moved effortlessly as he hooked up my car to the tow truck, muscles flexing beneath his tight black t-shirt. I tried not to stare. I really tried. But damn, it was impossible not to notice how ridiculously built he was. After loading up my car, Trey climbed into the truck and nodded toward the passenger seat. Hop in. I hesitated for half a second before pulling the door open and sliding in beside him. The inside of the truck smelled like oil, metal, and something distinctly masculine. Trey. As he started the engine, I stole a quick glance at his hands gripping the wheel. Large, strong, rough in a way that sent my brain straight into places it shouldn't be going. I needed to get a grip. So, how bad is it? I asked, desperate for a distraction. Trey shrugged. Won't know till I look under the hood. His voice was calm, confident, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. For some reason, that sent a wave of heat through me. Get it together, Logan. 15 minutes later, we pulled into his repair shop. It was a small, well-kept place with various cars in different states of repair. Trey hopped out first, motioning for me to follow. Come on, let's see what's wrong with your baby. Something about the way he said that made my stomach tighten. I leaned against the wall as he popped the hood, rolling up his sleeves as he inspected the engine. His biceps flexed with each movement, and I could see the sweat glistening on his skin. He worked in silence, completely focused. I should have been paying attention to what he was doing, but all I could see was him. Trey suddenly looked up, catching me staring. His lips curled into a smirk. Something wrong? I felt my face heat up. No, just wondering how long this'll take. He chuckled, a deep rumble that I felt more than heard. Relax, Logan. I'll take good care of it. Of you too, if you need. My heart slammed against my ribs. Was he flirting? Before I could figure it out, he turned back to the engine like he hadn't just said something that set my brain on fire. And suddenly, this wasn't just about a broken car anymore. It was about him, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I told myself I was overthinking it. Trey's comment, I'll take good care of it. Of you too, if you need. Had to be just shop talk, right? A mechanic making his client feel at ease. And yet, as I stood there, watching him work under the hood of my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The way he moved, confident and effortless, the occasional glance he threw my way. Was I imagining things, or was there something in his eyes? I needed to stop. I was here to get my damn car fixed, not to develop a crush on a man who was probably straight. I forced myself to focus on something else. The garage was surprisingly neat for a repair shop. Tools were organized. The air smelled of oil and rubber, and classic rock played softly from an old radio in the corner. I turned back just in time to see Trey wipe sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his muscles flexing under his dark skin. My throat went dry. Get it together, Logan. Trey finally looked up, holding a wrench in his large hand. Bad news. I blinked. Right. The car. Focus on the car. Yeah? I cleared my throat. Trey sighed, running a hand down his jaw. Your alternator's shot. Gonna need a new one. I groaned. Let me guess. It's not cheap? Trey's lips twitched. Depends. How good are you at sweet-talking? I stared at him. Was he messing with me? Or was this just how he talked to everyone? He leaned against the car, wiping his hands on a rag. I can get you a good deal on a replacement, but it'll take a few days to order the part. I exhaled. I need my car for work. Trey tilted his head. Got a ride home? I hesitated. No, I had planned to take an Uber, but the thought of sitting in some stranger's car, scrolling through my phone and trying not to think about the fact that I'd just met the hottest mechanic on earth sounded miserable. Trey tossed the rag onto the workbench. I can drive you. My heart stopped. What? Trey shrugged like it was no big deal. I'm closing up soon. I can drop you off. I should have said no. I should have thanked him and booked an Uber like a normal person, but my mouth had other plans. Yeah, okay. Trey nodded like he'd expected that answer. Give me 10 minutes to lock up. I watched as he moved around the shop, his hands working with ease, his body too damn distracting for someone who was supposed to be fixing cars. This was dangerous. I wasn't the type to crush on straight guys. It never led anywhere but heartbreak. But the way Trey looked at me, like he was waiting for something, made my brain short-circuit. 10 minutes later, we were in his truck. The inside smelled like leather and cologne, masculine and clean. The radio played low, and Trey drove with one hand on the wheel, his forearm resting on the open window. I should have been relaxed, but I wasn't. I was hyper-aware of his presence beside me. He didn't talk much, but the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged. Finally, he spoke. So, Logan, you live alone? I blinked. Yeah, just me. Trey nodded slowly. Must get quiet. I frowned. Sometimes? Why? He glanced at me. Just wondering. His voice was smooth, unreadable. I was overthinking again, right? We pulled up to my building, and I reached for the door handle. But before I could step out, Trey spoke again. You ever been with a guy before? My stomach dropped. I turned slowly, my pulse pounding. Did I hear him right? Trey's eyes were locked on mine, dark and unreadable. Steady, waiting. I felt hot all over. I had two choices: lie or tell the truth. I swallowed hard. Yeah. Trey didn't react, didn't smile, didn't smirk, but his fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. He nodded once. Good to know. And just like that, he unlocked the doors. I stepped out, my knees weak, my brain a mess. What the hell just happened? I closed the door, standing on the sidewalk as Trey pulled away. My heart was still hammering. Good to know. Those words looped in my head, and I knew, with absolute certainty, this wasn't over. I barely slept that night. Trey's words kept playing over and over in my mind. You ever been with a guy before? Good to know. It wasn't just what he had said, it was the way he said it. Calm, direct, like he had been testing the waters, and the way his fingers tightened on the wheel when I answered? That wasn't nothing. I woke up groggy, staring at the ceiling for a solid 10 minutes before finally rolling out of bed. My car was still at the shop, which meant I'd have to see Trey again soon. And after last night's conversation, I had no idea what to expect. By the time I arrived at the shop, my pulse was already speeding. Trey was outside, leaning against a car, arms crossed, talking to another mechanic. He looked just as ridiculously good as before. Tight black t-shirt, grease stains on his strong forearms, that same unreadable expression. The moment he spotted me, he said something to the guy beside him and pushed off the car, walking toward me. Morning? His voice was steady, but his eyes, I could feel them on me in a way that made my skin heat up. I cleared my throat. Hey. You good? I frowned. Yeah, why? His lips twitched, like he knew something I didn't. Look like you didn't sleep much. My stomach flipped. Did he know? I forced a small laugh. Yeah, well, long night. Trey hummed. That's so. There was something in his tone. Before I could respond, he motioned for me to follow him inside. Come on, got something to show you. Inside the shop, Trey led me to my car, which was up on the lift. New alternator came in early, he said, grabbing a wrench. I was going to call you later, but since you're here. I nodded, watching as he adjusted something under the hood. I should have been paying attention to the car, but instead, I was paying attention to him. The way his shirt stretched over his broad shoulders, the way his fingers moved effortlessly over the engine. Then, out of nowhere, Trey said, So, that thing I asked you yesterday. I tensed. What thing? He glanced up at me, eyes dark. You know what thing. My mouth went dry. He held my gaze, then slowly closed the hood of the car, setting his wrench down. Then he took a step closer. I felt the heat of his body before I even registered what was happening. I wasn't asking just to ask, Logan. My breath caught. He was close enough now that I could smell him. Oil, sweat, something uniquely Trey. I don't waste time with bullshit, he continued. So if I'm asking something, it's 'cause I want to know. I swallowed hard. And what exactly do you want to know? His jaw ticked. His eyes flickered over my face. Then he reached out. Not a full touch, just his fingers grazing my wrist. Barely there. But enough. If I did something, he said, voice lower now, what would you do? I barely processed what he was asking before he moved. His hand lifted. Slow, deliberate, until his fingers were against my jaw. My pulse spiked. He wasn't kissing me. He wasn't even touching me that much. But it was electric. I opened my mouth to say something. Anything. But before I could, Someone's voice called from the front of the shop. "Trey!" He immediately dropped his hand, stepping back like nothing had happened. My head was spinning. Trey turned toward the voice. "Yeah, give me a sec." Then he looked at me. "You should stick around for a bit," he said, voice unreadable. "I'm not done with you yet." Then he walked away, and I was completely losing my mind. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Trey had touched me. It wasn't much. Just a brush of his fingers against my jaw, just enough to send my mind into a tailspin. But it had been deliberate, and the way he said it, "I'm not done with you yet." What the hell did that even mean? I was still frozen in place when Trey disappeared into the shop's office. I could hear voices, his and whoever had called him, but I couldn't focus. My skin was still tingling from his touch. I should have left. I should have grabbed my keys and walked out. Instead, I waited. 15 minutes later, Trey came back, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was unreadable, but something in his eyes looked different, more intense. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to act normal. "Everything good?" He nodded. "Yeah, just some business. You ready to talk?" I tensed. "Talk about what?" Trey tilted his head slightly, stepping closer. "You know what." Jesus. He didn't play games. I felt my pulse hammering as he leaned against the workbench beside me, his presence overwhelming. "You ever done this before?" he asked. I blinked. "Done what?" He gave me a look. "Been with a guy. On the down low." I hesitated. "Not exactly." Trey's eyes flickered. "So you're not out?" I let out a breath. "Not really. Not at work, at least." Trey nodded like he understood. "I get it." Silence stretched between us. Then he said, "You ever wanted to?" I swallowed hard. Wanted to what? Trey's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let someone know exactly what you want." My stomach flipped. This wasn't some innocent flirtation anymore. This was something else. And the worst part? I wanted it. I licked my lips. "And if I said yes?" Trey didn't hesitate. "Then I'd say I'm glad we're on the same page." His voice was low, dangerous. My breath caught. The tension between us was suffocating. The air crackled, and I was sure, absolutely sure, that if we were anywhere but this damn shop, he would have already kissed me. Or maybe I would have kissed him. But before either of us could make a move, the front door chimed. Someone had walked in. Trey exhaled sharply, stepping back. Just like that, the moment was gone. He looked at me, jaw tight. "You sticking around?" I nodded, still dazed. Trey gave me a look that made my knees weak. "Good," he said. Then he turned and walked toward the front. And I realized something. I was in deep. I should have left. I should have taken my car keys, thanked Trey for fixing my alternator, and walked out like nothing had ever happened. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe for Trey to come back from the front of the shop. Maybe for another one of those loaded looks that made my stomach flip. Or maybe I was waiting for something I didn't dare say out loud. I heard him talking to a customer, a woman, judging by her voice. But my mind wasn't processing the words. I was too busy replaying every single moment we had shared since I walked into the shop. The tension, the touches, the way his voice changed when he spoke to me. I wasn't crazy. This was real. I rubbed a hand over my face, exhaling shakily. What the hell was I doing? Just as I was about to lose my nerve and leave, he came back. Trey walked in, rolling his shoulders like he was trying to shake something off. His eyes landed on me immediately. You're still here. I swallowed hard. Yeah. Something flashed in his gaze. Good. I didn't know what to say. Then, before I could overthink it, Trey walked past me and locked the front door. My breath caught. The shop was closed. He turned back to me, expression unreadable. Come with me. I followed him, because at this point, how could I not? He led me through the shop, past the workbenches and the smell of oil and rubber, until we reached a small, private office. The second we stepped inside, he closed the door. The air felt thicker, heavier. I turned to face him, my pulse hammering. Trey! And then he moved. 1 second, there was space between us. The next, he was right there, his body so close I could feel his heat. He didn't touch me. Not yet. But his eyes were locked onto mine, dark and intense. I don't do this, he murmured. I swallowed hard. Do what? He tilted his head slightly. This. Let people get in my head. My throat was dry. I don't waste time, Logan. His voice was low, like a quiet storm. So if I want something, I say it. He leaned in, just a fraction. So I'm saying it. My heart slammed against my ribs. Trey. His eyes burned into me. Tell me to stop. I couldn't. I didn't want to. Instead, I whispered, I won't. That was all he needed. Trey's hand gripped the back of my neck, pulling me in. And then he kissed me. I wasn't ready for it. I should have been. I had seen it coming, had wanted it so badly I could barely breathe. But when his lips crashed against mine, it still wrecked me. It was rough, desperate, like he had been holding back for too long and couldn't anymore. And I didn't hold back either. I grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, feeling the heat of his body against mine. His hands were everywhere, gripping my jaw, my waist, sliding over me like he needed to memorize the way I felt. I let out a quiet, shaky breath against his mouth, and Trey growled. Jesus. We barely pulled apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. I stared at him, dazed. Is this? I swallowed. Are we? Trey exhaled, his fingers still tight on my waist. Yeah. His voice was hoarse. Yeah, Logan. We are. And just like that, there was no turning back. I didn't know how long we stood there, breathing the same air, skin burning from where he touched me. Trey's hands were still gripping my waist, like he wasn't ready to let go, like he didn't want to. And God, I didn't want him to either. But reality was already creeping in, breaking through the haze of adrenaline and desire. Trey must have felt it too, because he exhaled and finally, reluctantly, took a small step back. Still, his fingers brushed my wrist, a lingering touch, as if he was reminding me that this wasn't a mistake. I swallowed hard. So, what now? Trey leaned against the desk, his dark eyes locked onto mine. That depends on you. I blinked. Me? His lips quirked. Yeah, I don't play games, Logan. And I don't do half measures. There was something raw in his voice, a quiet certainty. I stared at him, at the ridiculous way his shirt clung to his chest, at the smudge of grease on his forearm, at the way he was watching me like he already knew the answer. And maybe he did. Maybe I did too. Because if I had wanted to walk away, I would have done it a long time ago. I took a breath. I don't want this to be a one-time thing. Trey's gaze darkened, his jaw clenching slightly. Not out of frustration, but something deeper, something like relief. Good, he murmured. Neither do I. My stomach flipped. This was real. I let out a breathless chuckle, shaking my head. Jesus, I just came here to fix my car. Trey smirked, his dimples flashing. Guess you got more than you bargained for. I laughed softly. Yeah, I did. He reached for my hand, fingers grazing my palm before lacing them between mine. The roughness of his calloused skin against my own sent a shiver down my spine. Trey wasn't just a fling. He wasn't just some passing fantasy. He was something real. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of it. I squeezed his hand. So, should I just start breaking my car on purpose now? Trey grinned, pulling me closer. Nah, don't do that. He tilted his head slightly, his lips inches from mine. You don't need a broken car to come see me, Logan. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs, and when he kissed me again, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to stay a secret for long, and I didn't care, because whatever this was, it was just the beginning.